Hi there. I was just trying to explain how the culmination of 25 years of struggling with sinus cancer and the collection of some very powerful, effective treatments to the illness that can effectively reverse the symptoms and the suffering that sinus cancer patients endure, which cannot be underestimated, also resulted in my being able to round up all my abusers, which perhaps is no coincidence when we just go back to this brief list here. So, I mean, basically, when I rounded up the cures, when I found out that there were cures, that these charities were playing games and the pharmaceuticals companies were all just sort of in the mix to make money. So once I rumbled these two, I was able to gather up all these guys, pop them all in one net, and hand them into the police, which is what this net is here. It's basically the charities, the pharmaceutical companies, and my abusers all in one big bag. And you can imagine what a challenge or what a struggle that is. I mean, not just for myself, but any patient who's struggling with a terminal illness. Who maybe doesn't quite appreciate what they're up against. And the roots of this go back a very long way. And I'd like to just look into a little bit more deeply what's going on here with this subject of hiding cures, because this also now affects all COVID patients and the coronavirus outbreak pandemic that's happening at the moment, which I believe, is like all things, has roots that go back many thousands of years. And as cures for sinus cancer kept arriving and a wealth of ingenious tricks continued to reveal themselves, it quickly became clear all these solutions were ancient. Now, I could see this, of course, from the very nature of the solutions that I'd found. Things like the alkaline diet, which I'll show you in a moment, and oil pulling, were very clearly very ancient. This is just at first sight, just from using just common sense and intuition. And the research charities, of course, had destroyed them to collect vast sums of money on totally fraudulent and false pretenses. Now, I'll just very briefly go into what these cures were, just to show you how ancient they are and how I came to the conclusion that they were very ancient. Though my sinus cancer problem began in 1995, it was not until 17 years later that I finally found ways to reverse my hellish symptoms. The alkaline diet was one of my first discoveries, paving the way for more revelations over the next 8 years. And this was part of the realization that cancer grows in an acidic environment and can therefore be reversed by alkalizing our body and our body cells, to make it more of an inhospitable environment for cancer and therefore permanently remove the illness. And it's in the permanent removal of the illness, of course, that that incites so much ferocious response. Now, these solutions included also things like oil pulling, which I realised could very easily have saved all my teeth if only I had known about it right at the beginning in 1995. And I waited the best part of 22 years just to discover that in 2018 I was astonished to discover that oil pulling reversed my desperate dental issues. And you cannot describe my disappointment to find out that, holy crap, I mean, I lost over half of my teeth just to a simple little trick, an ingenious trick that's very clearly many thousands of years old. Because let's face it, the ancient people, I'm sure 5,000, 10,000 years ago, knew how to make extract oil from plants and were using it to keep their teeth clean. You can trust me. And of course, the gain this is easily going to become the target for violent oppression from people like the Dental Society, who can see a huge problem here as far as an obstacle to their income if they let this knowledge proliferate and be shared in the community. So they are frantically, obviously, in the business to lie as much as they can about this and tell everybody it doesn't work and fluoride is the answer, etc., etc. Now, as I tried to suggest a moment ago, this also extends to things like COVID-19, which I also discovered possible solutions to the coronavirus, again the subject of a great deal of suppression and controversy, but this could this be another example of ancient cures that were destroyed to make way for big profits? And this is suggested by this originally in a document published by this chap, Steve Barwick, who noted that colloidal silver beats, this is the old family of coronaviruses, and compiled a lot of clinical documentation to demonstrate his findings. Now, this very clearly again suggests that there were plagues happening many thousands of years ago, and there were solutions to it. There were doctors around many thousands of years ago who may well have found ways to combat these plagues. Plagues are not a new thing, and this is something that we tend to forget. You know, that illness and health and financial exploitation of patients is by no means a new thing. It's as old as the sun. You know, it goes back highly likely millions of years, not just thousands of years, right to the roots of, you know, when we were running around in caves or, you know, up in trees. Now, very briefly, how does this work? I mean, from a sinus cancer point of view, it is a ruthless business, and as I say, this is thousands of years old, this business, and a very dirty business, and it's quite alarming, quite disturbing to realise that, this is when I realised that countless others have suffered similar abuses for thousands of years simply to mutilate people for profit. I was angry and disgusted, suggesting very clearly that yes, you know, when you do hide cures, effective treatments for sinus cancer, this then gives you the opportunity to distort and push people's faces into these awful shapes, you know, which is a permanent problem. And of course, this is perfect picture candy for charities that want to rake in money. In other words, the more mutilated they can leave your face, and the more mutilated faces that they can create, the more money that, you know, potentially they can rake in. And of course, you know, that's the dirtiest business on the planet, to be beating people to death like myself. I mean, quite literally, you know, organising and encouraging these kinds of brutal attacks that happened to me in 2012, you know, was only necessary for one reason and one reason only, you know, to suppress the cures, get rid of all these cures that I was trying to expose and collect. Stop me from handing all these abusers, you know, pharmaceutical companies and charities into the police, with a view to very clearly giving them a free rein to just push people's faces into all these awful shapes, and use those faces then to just collect ever increasing amounts of money for themselves. Now, this again applies very clearly, unfortunately, to COVID-19, which when we have a look back here, you know, there's similarities with sinus cancer and COVID-19. Again, we find that, you know, these diseases fall into much the same categories, and rather noticeably and rather worryingly, AIDS and COVID-19, you know, the COVID-19 latched onto the bottom of this list here, shows that again we're losing control of this list. It's growing, it's not shrinking. And it also suggests to you that AIDS is not a naturally occurring illness. Again, when we look into the subject of health challenges, health conditions, we'll find that animals, monkeys, chimpanzees, bats never suffered from any terminal deadly illness for millions of years until humans came along and built laboratories and started manufacturing viruses with the specific intention to make money out of them and keep us patients sick for the rest of their life. And that was the motive behind making AIDS. And it's no coincidence that the suspicious narrative that we heard around the time that AIDS suddenly materialized is very similar to COVID-19. And we heard, oh yes, it suddenly started in a chimpanzee. A chimpanzee woke up one day with AIDS and then decided to give it to his wife, you know, or something. It was just the most ridiculous story you've ever heard, you know, and this illness suddenly just killing people, you know, killing animals and people just out of nowhere. And of course, a very similar narrative to what we've heard with COVID-19. Oh, it started in a bat, jumped to a human, and we're off again. But of course, if you look into my other